Good morning and thank you for joining me for this review of Daemon by C.L. Moore. This is the second last story in the Best of C.L. Moore, this delightful anthology that Rob from Elspace gave me and I've been working my way through. Yes, there's a bruise under my eye. I talk about that in the last video, which is the quarterly review or quarter quell. Moving on. This was a fantastic story, and apparently it was initially published in a magazine, surprisingly enough. But what is astonishing, it was first published in 1946. It feels incredibly contemporary, incredibly nowish. This is a flawless story, like so much of C.L. Moore's writing is. Anyhow, Daemon, copyright 1946. Published in the October edition of Famous Fantastic Mysteries, and copyright renewed by C.L. Moore in 1974. If you've got a copy of that Famous Fantastic Mysteries from October 1946, I urge you to go and read Daemon from it. I don't have that. I've got the collected works, but my understanding is there's some spectacular artwork in that edition as well. Okay, so the story is told as a deathbed confessional, as it were, by our simple-minded, so he tells us, protagonist Luiz. I'm not sure how to pronounce Luiz. I don't speak Portuguese. Lewis. Let's go with Lewis, and if I'm wrong, tell me. I'm good with that. And this isn't a spoiler. I'm going to try to not spoil some of the elements that are most important in this book. But Lewis calls himself Louis Obobo, which means, in the language he grew up in, simple-mindedness. And this deathbed confession is told to a padre, some sort of Christian father. And Lewis is telling him the whole story of how he came to be on this island somewhere dying. It is a fantastic story. So Lewis initiated in home in Rio, and being simple-minded, he didn't have a great childhood, but his grandmother was kind to him, and he lived with her until her death. Apparently he found her dead, but he didn't really understand what death was, only that his grandmother was no longer there. So he spent a lot of time looking for kindness from other humans, unsuccessfully, as it happens, scavenging for food in garbage dumps and around the city. And one night he finds himself in a pub by the waterfront where various people ply him with strong drink until he passes out. He wakes up on board a sailing ship. Yes, this is a shipboard, almost piracy tale, and that part of it's fantastic. He has been shanghaied into being on this ship. And as he describes the ship and its captain and crew, that's as we slowly discover this weird thing about Louis Abobo, is that he can see these things that he calls, never mind what he calls them, lurking over the shoulder of the people he interacts with, but he doesn't have one. When he gets on board the ship, the captain, whose name is something suitably intimidating, let's see if I could find that, Captain Stryker, sees him, and he first sees this magnificent malignant red being hovering over him with his eyes closed. And then he starts talking about how everyone has these beings except for him. He lacks them. Captain Stryker is a horrible man, maybe not a pirate, but he sits in that narrow band where the captain of a ship is often worse than the actual pirates per se, and as such. And Louis Obobo isn't treated well there. And he might not have stayed except for one character who he calls the Shaughnessy. The Shaughnessy is a passenger, and a wealthy passenger. We don't really know where he was ever going, because Lewis doesn't himself know that sort of thing. Anyway, the Shaughnessy, as you can tell from the name, is Irish, and he's kind to Lewis, and he tells him stories about Greece, where he used to live and that he loved, and more stories from Ireland. And Lewis can't tell the difference between a true story and a not true story, so his imagination becomes populated by this Greek mythology and Irish mythology. Now, since Lewis is treated as garbage by everyone else on board, the Shaughnessy becomes his only real point of human contact. And then one day, and he's awed by the beauty of the ship and the surroundings, but he's not awed by his experiences. And one day he makes the terrible mistake of bumping into the captain, and the captain grabs up a spar and starts beating him with it until he's unconscious, and there's this flash of light in his head. And while he's beating him, this red malignant source behind the captain's shoulders is happy and crooning and smiling for the violence and the malignancy being done by the captain. Under his control? Maybe, we're not sure. As a result of this, the Shaughnessy says when he comes, they've stopped at this tiny little island in the middle of nowhere because there's a spring of fresh water there. And the Shaughnessy says when the captain comes back on board, I will make sure he never does that to you again, Lewis. Lewis, however, isn't waiting for that. He leaps overboard and gets washed up onto the island. He passes out from the force of the waves driving him onto the shore. And when he wakes up, the Shaughnessy is there, but no one else is. They've been abandoned on the island by the nasty Captain Stryker. Now, the Shaughnessy does have a figure hovering over him as well. Apparently, it's a sort of pearly pale with streaks of dark that Lewis later comes to believe may have meant that the Shaughnessy had done bad things in the past, but he was always nice to Lewis, so he doesn't care. This narrative isn't the narrative of a simpleton, and that's no spoiler because he explains it. His time on the island with the, what does he call them? He calls them naive, nin something or other. Slowly made him less and less simple. Nin. They're not ninjas. It's a strange word and it sounds vaguely Celtic, so... but right from the beginning he tells us they are no longer on that island. And he wouldn't want to stay there without them. Never mind, I can't find the word. At the point where he's doing the deathbed confession to the Padre, that's obviously the end of the story. We don't actually see the end of the story, but we hear his story of what happened to him on the island. The Shaughnessy cares for him, and he always felt like there was an awareness to the island. And after the Shaughnessy dies, all of a sudden, all these mythic creatures emerge from the trees. You've got dryads, you've got naiads emerging from the oceans, and I think the stream. There's a unicorn. There's this whole mythological... This is the Ninas, or whatever he called him, emerging to engage with him, and he slowly becomes less simple. And that's as far as I'm going to go. This is a fantastic story. I think I've said that about every single one of the C.L. Moore stories that I've read, but this one is truly mythologically outstanding. The writing is outstanding. The feeling is incredibly contemporary. If someone had told me it was written by someone last week, I would believe it, because there is no dating to the writing. It's so incredibly well done that it could belong to every single age and any age. And now, maybe this is a little bit spoilery, but stay for it anyway. Who remembers The Golden Compass and The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman? The movie was good. The books were also very good, and I've kept them because I really enjoyed them. In case you don't remember them, this is an alternative universe story. I mean, they're meant to be children's or young adult, I'm not sure, in which Lyra lives in an alternative version of Oxford. In this universe, people don't have souls. What they have is demons. And the demons are little animals. I think hers is a ferret or something like that. Others have monkeys, cats, whatever. There's an animal, and that is your demon. If your demon dies, your demon can't be separated from you, and you can only be separated from your demon, I believe, in death. Now, these things that Lewis sees over people's shoulders, he calls demons. And I looked everywhere in this book to see if Philip Pullman credited C.L. Moore, and he doesn't. And I really, really feel that like he's read this story. So these demons are on everyone's shoulder. and the captain's was red and angry. Most of the other crew were kind of bad demons, but he's always seen them. His grandmother had a wonderful one. Throughout his life, he's been surrounded by people who have these demons. He doesn't have one. And he says, that means I don't have a soul. And that is sort of borne out by the experience he has on the island after the Shaughnessy dies and his demon, the pearly one, grows bright, bright, bright and then disappears. That's when these Ninas, or whatever they're called, start emerging from the wood. And they tell him eventually that since some person was born in a stable under a rising star, people who don't believe in them have made them flee from their original homes. They're immortal, but they can't be around people who have these demons, these souls. Lewis, they could be friends with because he doesn't. So you've got this breathtakingly good concept, and it unfolds slowly. Now, once you've realized these facts about the story, the rest of it makes sense. And there's some spoilers that C.L. Moore gives us about her story and how it's going to progress that I'm not going to share. Now, I think some readers can debate whether Lewis is actually telling the truth or whether he's delirious. I see no point in that sort of debate. I read the story as given. And as given, it is absolutely fantastic. So, Daemon is apparently, by some people on the internet, not me, I'm no scholar, is discernibly a solo effort that Moore wrote on her own without a collaboration. I don't know enough about Cutler and Moore. They're really hard to find in Australia to be able to tell the difference between the two, but most people that I've read so far seem to be certain that Daemon is totally C.L. Moore. Pullman, why didn't you credit it? I feel like you should have. The concept of the demons as it's given here is eerily prescient of many, many other stories and concepts that I've seen since then, and it's just so good, so beautifully written. The other thing that you've got there a little bit, you also get a little bit of, and now I'm blanking, what's that Shakespeare one? Prospero's Island. Prospero's Island. Thank God for the internet. It makes up for the fact that I have no memory. The Tempest. There we go. There's very much The Tempest feel about the whole magical island and the shipwrecking on it and everything about it. That was the first hint of another book that I got. And then, of course, the demons. Great. This has been a longer review than I thought for a short story, but every single one of these C.L. Moore stories are so meaty and juicy and delicious and wonderful. Totally should read them. Consume them omnivorously. So I'm planning on another short story before I get stuck into reading authors' names beginning with G. Thank you very much for watching, and read good books and read short stories. And if you've got anything by C.L. Moore, that's going to be a good book or a good short story. So read C.L. Moore. Bye.